Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Who to blame? I'm in California. I will be here for 3 months teaching. I have lived off and on in California from 1978 to the present, and I come back every year for 2 or 3 months in the winter when I'm teaching. But I left in 2016 for a reason, the reason being I took over morning drive from Bill Bennett. It's easier to do on the East Coast. But now that I'm going to move to afternoon drive next week, I'm not moving back to California. It is a failed state. It is a state in utter collapse. And there is a reason, and there are people to blame. And I was going to postpone this until next week, but the anger erupted yesterday. And it's going to continue to erupt as the scale of the devastation across places like Pasadena, which is old school California, and then the Palisades, which is glitterati California, and then whatever happens today and tonight, we're going to have another day of Santa Ana winds. And I want to begin with a fact. Santa Ana winds are a feature, not a bug. And it's got nothing to do with climate change. All right, we have been having Santa Ana winds from the first time I got out here in 1978, and I arrived in California and said, my goodness, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And if you drive from the west side of LA, as I did, down to San Diego, you've driven the most beautiful stretch of the country, unless you happen to drive Pacific Coast Highway North. And that's the most. Why is it so bad here? Why does nothing work? I take part of the blame on myself. I thought term limits were a good idea. Term limits are an awful idea in state government because they lead to people of very little ability putting up their hand and saying, why not me? Instead of people like Willie Brown, and God love Willie Brown. He drove me crazy. I thought Willie Brown was the problem. I was wrong. Willie Brown was actually a coherent, very smart, very shrewd. Willie Brown is kind of like Donald Trump, only a West Coast version who was doing Trumpian things long before Donald Trump showed up on a national and international level. Willie Brown was about the power and getting things done. He leaned forward to me back in the days I did the nightly news in L.A., and my favorite interview ever. And I said, why do you do what you do? You've been doing it for so long. And he leaned forward and said, Hugh, I must admit that sometimes I simply enjoy the raw exercise of power. I like that. I like the candor. In fact, San Francisco ran well when Willie Brown was the mayor. Now it's a nightmare. I'm not going to use any other indelicate term. It's a nightmare. People don't go back to San Francisco. Now large parts of Los Angeles are in ashes. Why is that? The answer is government. All right? Too much government doing too many things badly. I can focus with a great deal of experience on coastal sage scrub and fires because I know this world. Until I retired from the practice of law in 2016, I was a land use lawyer in California and in the other western states, Nevada, up in Washington State, in Oregon a little bit, out in Hawaii and Palau, but mostly on the West Coast, mostly in California. And I dealt primarily with 3 agencies: the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the federal side. And I dealt with a half dozen agencies and too many governments at the local level to count, whether it's the city of Beaumont, the county of Riverside, the Riverside County Habitat Conservation Authority, the San Diego Board of Supervisors. I made hundreds of appearances. I'm not bad on the radio because I've been talking forever as a lawyer. And I'm an administrative lawyer. I went to court, a half dozen times in my life, and I'm not bad at that either, but that's not my calling. My calling was to stand up in front of local elected officials or to go into rooms with bureaucrats and try and make a case for common sense. The one thing I would not do, because I did it once, I would not accept any offer of employment that involved the California Coastal Commission because it's crazy. It's run by communists. It's run by actual, honest-to-God communists. They don't call themselves communists, but they are communists. And they steal people's land, and they destroy people's lives, and they are not worth the paper on which they're written. The Coastal Protection Act is nothing but an authoritarian power grab by a half dozen group of bureaucrats. Now, what about the California Department of Fish and Game or the California Wildlife Commission? I appeared before them often. I went as far north as you can go. Siskiyou County. I've been in Tulare County. I go down to San Diego. I know every part of California at every level. California's bureaucracy is full of less than bright people. I'm not going to call them stupid. They can read. They're literate. They are, however, inanimate for long periods of time. Federal bureaucrats, worse. The best thing I have done in the last year was have a long, long lunch with Doug Burgum, our incoming Secretary of the Interior. And I am very optimistic that Doug Burgum is going to break the China. He has to. And I am very hopeful that Lee Zeldin at the EPA is going to break the China. He has to. They have to get together. They have to crush the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They have to demolish Region 9 of the Environmental Protection Agency. They have to stop their bureaucrats from stopping people from doing ordinary, normal things that California did right through the time that Pete Wilson left office. California would clear coastal sage scrub. California would not let forest undergrowth collect in masses of fire that we saw go up in Yosemite. California would not allow, under Pete Wilson, Richard Riordan, when he was the mayor of L.A., he would not have cut the fire budget for $17 million so he could give it in gift cards to illegal immigrants who've come over Joe Biden's open border. It is a nightmare. I have told you last year when I was here, and 2 years ago when I was here, I went with Judge David Carter, a Clinton appointee, to the zombie apocalypse that is Skid Row in L.A., and could not believe my eyes. There are 70,000 people, many addicts, many mentally ill, many simply ravaged by fortune and fate's choices, on the street in a human apocalypse that nothing happens about. San Francisco has open-air drug markets that they closed down for the Chinese Communist premier Xi Jinping when he came. They cleaned up for a couple of weeks. And it's back to being what it is, which is a place you don't want to be. You don't want to let kids walk around in that city. And the homeless problem has spread everywhere. I am going to bet that we are going to find out that some of these, not all of these fires, are set by homeless people in encampments. That is unfortunately a feature, not a bug of California now, is that homeless people make fires. And when they do, they often start brush fires, and they are usually put out. When they do that, I don't know what the reference to fireworks was that I heard earlier. Nobody knows why this happened. But I know why it spread the way it did. They were not planning well. They did not clear the Santa Monica Mountains of the coastal sage scrub, which grows and grows and grows and grows until it burns. If you go back 200 years, California would have massive fires because, and we know this because of the species that come up after a fire. But people came to California, and it's a great place to live, and they build homes. And when you build homes, you have to build infrastructure. And you have to have police, and you have to have fire, and you have to have water systems that deliver water. It's the basic batting and running and base running of governing. Fire and police, roads, potholes. It's not glamorous. It's what governors like Mike DeWine do, governors like, well, Ron DeSantis does. Now, there are some problems that come with the development of climate change, and that is insurance companies are trying to figure out what to do about flooding, but they are not figuring out what to do about climate change and fires in California. They're figuring out that nothing works in California, and they don't want to insure anything here because the government can't deliver anything on time anywhere with any level of efficiency. Now, if Officer Tom is out there, I'm not talking about you, Detective Tom. We have great men and women. I covered L.A. every night for 10 years on the nightly news. I co-hosted the nightly news for PBS, so it was a half hour, right? And we had left or right. I was the right-winger, right? I was the conservative, not very conservative, but conservative, center-right guy. Pat Morrison, lefty, great writer, brilliant woman from the Los Angeles Times. Ruben Martinez, great writer, brilliant lefty, just a lefty. And Kerman Maddox, Democratic operative, very smart guy, good friend. And we would just, from the LA riots forward, I did 10 years of covering everything. And I would come in with the perspective of a guy who represents landowners. People own land, they're not allowed to protect it. And what we need the Supreme Court to do, the answer is property rights. I want to give you the answer. If you give people the right to protect their property, they will. If you deny them that right, they're going to have their houses lost in catastrophic events like this. They're going to get beat up on the street. Their streets are going to turn into a shambles. You have to vote for people who want to do the dull and boring things of governing, that want to pick up the trash, that want to empower the police, that want the fire department to be fully funded, that do not give a crap about DEI, because DEI's got nothing to do with going into the face of an inferno and putting it out. DEI has nothing to do with water pressure. DEI has nothing to do with stopping bad guys. It's got everything to do with finding the people who are so equipped to do that. More important than all of that, President Trump needs to tell Doug Burgum and Lee Zeldin, go out there and preempt everything. Shut down these crazies at the California Air Resources Board. Shut down these crazies at the Air Quality Management District. Shut them down. And Congress, don't give any money to California for this. Do not do it. Do not bail them out, because they have been spending money like drunken sailors on pensions that no one ought to get who has not been in combat. No one ought to receive a state pension higher than a colonel who has been in combat in the United States Army or Marine Corps, or a captain in the United States Navy. That's it. That'll be the top of the pension ladder. That's not the case in California. It's a broke state. It's out of money. And you know what? It's going to run into the wall of we can't fake it anymore because of the unfunded pension liabilities, which are massive, because of the California Teachers Association, the California Prison Guard, the tribes. They have all run California for their private benefit. And Gavin Newsom, God bless you, Governor, you're not very good at this. You're horrible at it. And I hope Rick Caruso runs. And I hope everyone in California who wants water delivered, who realize, you know, Pete Wilson was a pretty damn good governor. So was George Duke Majan. We really do need someone who has the emergency power, who is going to get stuff done. And we have got to roll over the blue California. It's a super majority left-wing nutter government. It's like living in the worst government of Europe in California. The problem is government. To quote Ronald Reagan, government is not the answer. Government is the problem. And that's why we have the cataclysm that is California, the catastrophe that is this week.